So we'll be hearing from several people today. I'll open, and then we're going to hear from Jeremy, and then Jess, Rinchu, Wenhai, and then Sandeep. So I'll just say the order one more time. It's I'll open, and then Jeremy, Jess, Rinchu, Wenhai, and then we'll hear from time of teaching from Sandeep. So I was thinking about a question this week. If you're part of this church, you know two things that come up very frequently are devotion to God and loving Him. Jesus said when somebody asked Him, what's the greatest commandment of all? Because there was a whole book full of commandments that they had, and somebody came up to Jesus and said, what's the greatest commandment of all of that? And Jesus said, it's to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And so we take that as the greatest commandment as well, and we also we understand devotion to Him is what we want to make our lives about. 2 Corinthians 11:3 says, don't be led astray from this pure and simple devotion to Jesus. And so I was meditating on what's the difference between the two? Are they the same thing? Is love the same as devotion? And as I thought about that, I was blessed by a couple things that I wanted to share. What the difference between love for God and devotion to Him is. What's the difference between being devoted to someone, being devoted to Him, and loving Him with all of our heart. And so the way I understand devotion is that when I say I'm devoted to something, it means that I've determined that that's going to be the main thing in my life. That's going to be what my life revolves around. You think of somebody who's devoted to getting a gold medal, and so they devote themselves to some sport or something, and their life has to be all about it from morning to night, day in and day out, and they can't falter from it. Their diet has to be about it. Everything revolves around that one thing, this gold medal. And so I kind of thought of this the same way. When I think of being devoted to Christ, it means I've determined myself to make my life about Jesus, and everything else is a far second, far last place compared to Him. The best picture I think of when I think of devotion to Jesus is the contrast between Mary and Martha in Luke 10. We know the story where Martha was one who's doing a wonderful thing for Jesus. She's laboring not just for Jesus but His servants. In a sense, she's almost like washing the feet of the Jesus and His servants by doing the work that nobody else wants to do, by cooking and cleaning and doing these things. But then Mary's sitting. What looks to everyone else, maybe it looks like she's lazy at His feet, sitting there. And so she got rebuked, but then, and Martha tried to criticize her as well. But Jesus came back, and in Luke 10, at the end, Jesus said to Martha, the Lord answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. In verse 40, it says that Martha was distracted with everything. So there was millions of things in life that we can be distracted with. And Martha caught hold of one of those things that she thought was important, and it was a good thing, but it wasn't the main thing. It wasn't what she should have revolved everything around. And Mary found that one thing, the one thing necessary. And so I believe that Mary is a picture of what pure and simple devotion to Jesus is making life about the one thing out of the millions of things that we can make it about, choosing the right thing. And that's devotion, making the person, not serving Jesus, not making it about anything outside of the person of Him. And I think there's somebody trying to get in the door. If somebody can just open. Thanks. See somebody peeking in. Making it not about His blessings, not about what He can give me, not about revolving around what I can do for Him, but making it about Himself. And I believe that's why Jesus said that Mary found the one thing that was necessary. And so I think there's a lot of things good things in this life we can consume ourselves with. There's a lot of important things too. Serving God is a wonderful, important thing that we should do with all of our might, that we should do with all of our heart. And having a good children, a good family, and being healthy and dieting and exercising, these are all really important things because God wants us to be good stewards of what He's given us. But I think the difference is it's not what I should revolve my life around. The devotion determines what I'm revolving my life around. And what we choose to revolve our life around, that's where all of our that's where our heart's going to be. And so I think that when I choose to devote myself to Jesus, I'm making a determination that I'm going to try. My flesh is pulling me to be caught up with so many things, but I'm just going to determine myself to make it my life, not about any of these other things which are temporary, but about Jesus himself, drawing close to my Father in heaven, and everything else is second. So that's how I understand devotion. And so how is love different than that? How is that not love? I've kind of thought over the years, as I've thought of my love for God, I've tried to put a picture on it and then imitate that picture. Like, love for God looks like this, so I'm going to do this. But that I've gone off of the edge so many times, and it hasn't really kept my heart enraptured with God. Like, for example, love for God means talking to him all the time. I always want to be in his presence, so I'm just going to talk to him all the time. So one day later, I'll find my mind wandering. I'll be like, well, I guess I stumbled in my love for Jesus because I'm not talking to him as much as I want to be, or he's not in my mind, or love for God means having a deep relationship with him. And but these are all fancy ideas that I can kind of come up with myself, or that I can hear in sermons. So what's really helped me is seeing what the Bible has said love for God is. And so I understand, the way I get it is from two verses specifically, and the first one is 1 John chapter 5. 1 John chapter 5, verse 3. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. Now, it's not... I think it would be wrong to say I should make my life just about keeping his commandments, because it's easy to try to keep God's commandments and forget about him. So there's also another one that I want to share that I think can kind of balance it out. And that's John 15:13. John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends. So Jesus defines here, he says the greatest love is one where you do something for the sake of another person. So I believe that's where it is the motive. That's where the love for God comes in. Not just doing his commandments, but doing it for his sake. And laying down my life. And there's stories recently, horrible stories about Christians getting killed for their faith. But that happens to a few people in the world. God allows it to happen, but he hasn't allowed it to happen to us as of yet. So if we're not laying down our life physically, what's the main way that we lay down our life for Jesus? And I believe that's 1 John 5:3 is obeying his commandments. And how is that laying down our life? We're laying down our life when we have to give up something. We have to sacrifice something. Laying down your life is a sacrifice for somebody else. And when we obey his commandments, in a sense, there's a sacrifice that we make, because we're giving up something of ourselves that our flesh wants, that we want, for the sake of Christ, because we love him. And I think that's what Romans 12:1 means, what it says, be a living sacrifice. It's we're living our life all the time, laying down our life, obeying his commandments, holding our tongue, holding our eyes, not just because we want to see ourselves as better people. I've noticed that can be a motive in my heart sometimes. Maybe not even thinking about God. I just want to see myself as a good person. That's a wrong motive too. I want my motive to be, I love Jesus with all my heart. And if this is going to disappoint him or let my Father down, then I want to give myself up, and I'm happy to deny myself this thing that I wanted or what my flesh wants. I'm happy to crucify that part of my flesh for the sake of Jesus and my Father. And so to desire that we want God to be blessed more than we do, that we want God to have joy more than we do, we put God's priorities above my own. I believe that that's what's sets apart somebody who loves Jesus from somebody who just obeys his commands but doesn't really love him, or thinks they're obeying him but they're really not doing it for the right reason. And even in churches, it's so easy. I've noticed myself. I've attended church for a long time, but so often I found myself not having the right motive and doing things out of a love for myself. the Bible says that in the end times, that's the first marker, 2 Timothy 3, just turn there real quick. That's the first marker that of people, what people will be like in the end. It says, 2 Timothy 3, starting from verse 1, but realize this, that in the last days difficult times will come, for men will be lovers of self. That's the first marker that they list out in the end, that people just live for themselves. They just don't care about God. Maybe they profess God, we want to be God, but basically in the inside we're still doing things for ourselves. Maybe nobody else can see, but at the root core of it, we're just living for ourselves. That's a sign that we're not really loving God. Even if we're trying to obey his commandments, maybe if the motive is wrong, and that's a sign that we're in the end is when the world is basically doing all these good things, but they're basically just for themselves, or doing all these evil things that just whatever I can get, me. I just want to enjoy life. I just want to have fun. I want to be comfortable, and so I believe that that's a marker that we're in the end, and that's something that we should keep ourselves from. That we're not just lovers of self. Let God not find this church to be lovers of self, but lovers of God. And I don't know, maybe love and devotion are more similar than I think, but they're two sides of the same coin. I want to be 100% fully wholehearted for both of those. I want to be devoted to the Lord, making my life all about him, and a love of him lover of him who's ready to lay down my life, whatever situation, no matter how small or big, for his sake. So Jeremy is next, and then we're going to have